Before we even begin exploring Holloway Manor, I want to extend a quick invitation. If you enjoy mystery and horror stories like this one, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the dark secrets we'll be revealing. And feel free to leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to discover who dares to explore such dark stories with us. The mansion stood like a forgotten relic of time, encrusted with ivy and shadows, in the remote hills of North Carolina. Those walls, which once breathed wealth and lavish parties, now exuded abandonment and decay. John Whitaker, a billionaire with a taste for old properties, passed through the rusty iron gate with the feeling that something was watching him. There was no sound besides the wind, but the silence was heavy, almost palpable. As he crossed the entrance hall, footsteps echoed against the cracked marble floor. Every detail of the place seemed to tell a story of glory and horror. Dust-covered chandeliers, frayed curtains, portraits of ancestors staring with eyes that seemed to follow his every move. John felt a chill, but smiled to himself. That was precisely the challenge, to restore what time had destroyed. As he explored the first wing, the smell of mold mixed with something indefinitely metallic made him stop. Opening a creaking door, he found a room that exuded a deeper sense of neglect. In the corner, furniture covered in grimy sheets looked like shadows of sleeping figures. An extinguished fireplace held ashes that, though dead, still retained a strange pattern. Symbols scratched as if someone had performed silent rituals. John sighed and mentally noted, "I'll need a thorough inspection." But what he didn't know was that the mansion held more than just corroded wood and torn tapestries. In the basement, hidden behind a false wall, was a secret compartment. The house's old records never mentioned that space. Each step of the stone staircase leading to the basement reverberated like a drum in the darkness. When John's light illuminated the room, he found sealed boxes, yellowed files, and objects that no one had been allowed to see for decades. A leather-bound diary with pages marked by dark stains caught his attention. The handwriting, though careful, had something desperate and disturbing about it. As he leafed through the diary, the story of the former owner, Margaret Holloway, began to unfold. Accounts of disappearances, unexplained vanishings of employees and neighbors, tales of violent confrontations with creditors, all documented as if it were routine. Each line carried a suffocating tension. John realized that this mansion was not merely a forgotten property. It was a record of silent tragedies that time had tried to erase. Lightning flashed across the sky, and the storm began to echo through the house. Rain beat against broken, stained glass windows, while the wind whistled through the hallways. John felt the building reacting to his presence. Doors slammed shut on their own, rusty chains dragged across the floor, and the diary seemed to pulse in his hands, as if begging to be read in its entirety. He wasn't superstitious, but something about that mansion tested his logic, challenging his skepticism. While examining a compartment full of old photographs, he noticed a disturbing pattern: smiling faces of guests and employees who had mysteriously disappeared in the same year, marked by small cryptic notes in the margin. One portrait in particular caught his eye: Margaret Holloway, with eyes so penetrating they seemed alive. A shiver ran down John's spine, the feeling that the woman in the photo was still watching him, even after decades. Without realizing it, he was drawn to explore every room in the basement, every dark corner. Each object seemed to carry a fragment of hidden secrets, some so macabre that John needed to step back to maintain his composure. But there was something there, beyond curiosity and fear, the feeling that unraveling that mystery would be the key to understanding what really happened in that house. At the end of the first inspection, John found himself alone in the middle of a silent mansion, with rain and wind as his only companions. The basement held stories that defied comprehension. tales of betrayal, pain, and despair that echoed almost tangibly. With each step, the feeling that something was watching grew stronger. He knew that this visit was only the beginning, and that each secret uncovered could alter not only his perception of the house, but the very reality of his existence. The clock struck midnight when John closed his diary, and one last glance into the basement revealed a shadow he swore he'd never seen before. It moved almost imperceptibly, but there was certainty in the movement. He wasn't alone, and the mansion was ready to reveal everything, or devour him along with its secrets. The following morning brought a thick fog over the property. The once lush garden showed clear signs of neglect, broken statues, moss-covered paths, and shrubs growing wildly. The still imposing facade seemed to observe any visitor with silent eyes, as if the house had a consciousness of its own. John decided to explore the surroundings before facing the basement again. As he walked through the side corridors, he encountered the mansion's first unexpected resident, an elderly caretaker named Henry, who had worked for the Holloway family for decades, miraculously surviving the mysterious events that had marked the house. Henry had tired but attentive eyes and a rigid posture that indicated he knew every secret of the place, or at least some of them. Without unnecessary words, he began to guide him through the abandoned rooms, pointing out the places where accidents had occurred and where missing objects had been found. Each account was told with a mixture of sadness and resignation, making it clear that this place carried scars deeper than any painting or tapestry could show. As Henry narrated, John realized that the mansion was not merely a physical space, but an organism in itself. Each corridor, room, and staircase seemed to shape the behavior of those who entered, as if testing their courage and patience. The library, for example, contained old books with fingerprints in specific places, almost as if someone had left coded instructions for future visitors. Scattered among the documents were records of tense family meetings, financial decisions that resulted in betrayals, and accounts of internal conflicts that culminated in tragic events. Margaret Holloway's diary, discovered in the basement, served as a guiding thread to understanding the family's inner workings. She wasn't just an eccentric woman. Her life reflected a constant struggle between power, isolation, and secrets that threatened to destroy everything around her. Through its pages, John began to notice patterns. Servants disappeared after disobeying strict orders. Guests were invited to stay only temporarily, and certain nights were marked by silent encounters that no one dared describe. Secondary characters began to take shape. Clara, the housekeeper, a woman who looked she knew the house better than anyone else. She didn't talk much, but his gestures and glances conveyed silent warnings. Ethan, a young hired gardener recently, who seemed too curious for his own good, and John felt he might discover more than he should. Margaret Holloway. It does not appear physically, but like a constant shadow through letters, diaries, and photographs, affecting the decisions and emotions of everyone who they crossed the mansion. The cultural context of the United States also began to subtly reveal itself. The house's architecture reflected the country's golden age, with neoclassical details indicating ostentation and status. But the abandonment also reflected the country's social and economic changes. Powerful families crumbling, secrets being buried to maintain a facade of normalcy. John, with his pragmatic mindset of a modern billionaire, was both fascinated and uncomfortable. He found himself inside a capsule of the past that resisted contemporary logic. While exploring the kitchen and guest rooms, John noticed that the space concealed small peculiarities: doors locked with makeshift locks, secret compartments inside closets, and objects out of place, as if someone had left in a hurry. Henry warned, "The mansion doesn't like to be ignored. It observes, judges, and tests all who try to control it." This phrase echoed in John's mind, reminding him that this place was not just a house. It was a living enigma, shaping the history of all who dared to enter. In moments of silence, John began to reflect on the invisible tension that permeated the mansion. The interaction between the characters showed that the fear was not only in past events, but in the constant perception of surveillance and danger. Every action, every step taken in the dark corridors could trigger unexpected consequences, connecting past and present in a disturbing way. The day ended with a visit to the old conservatory, where withered plants coexisted with cracked vases and moss-covered benches. There, John realized that every detail of the mansion, however insignificant it seemed, had a story, and that those secrets, silently kept for decades, were beginning to test his own courage and determination. At this point, the setting is more vivid. The secondary characters and antagonists have clearer motivations, and US cultural elements have been organically integrated. The suspense and macabre atmosphere remain, setting the stage for the conflict that will intensify in the next section. The first storm had passed, but the tension inside the mansion only increased. John felt that every step he took was being watched by unseen eyes, and that Margaret's diary was not just a historical record, but a silent warning about dangers he did not yet fully understand. The first conflict arose when Henry insisted on showing John the old games room, claiming that certain objects there shouldn't be touched. John, driven by curiosity, ignored the warning. The instant he touched a dusty billiard table, a hidden box opened on its own, revealing old documents and photographs of people who had mysteriously disappeared. Each image seemed to exude a cold energy that penetrated the skin. The suspense intensified. The mansion wasn't just an abandoned place, it reacted to John's actions, as if recognizing intruders and curious onlookers. As John explored the basement more thoroughly, he realized that not all the obstacles were physical. Doors that had previously opened easily were now locked for no apparent reason. Lights flickered erratically, shadows stretched in impossible ways. Ethan, the gardener, watched from afar with an expression that mixed fear and fascination, and seemed to have discovered something John didn't yet understand. Each secondary character began to directly affect the conflict. Clara, silent and reserved, made small comments that unsettled John, while Henry, even with his experience, displayed unusual nervousness, as if something in the house had awakened again. The conflict took on a new dimension when John found the secret compartment that wasn't in the mansion's records. Inside were personal items belonging to Margaret and former missing employees, torn letters, partially burned belongings, and a collection of objects that seemed like rituals or meticulous preparations for events that should never be seen. Each discovery heightened the suspense, and John began to feel intense psychological pressure. It was clear that the house held memories of tragic and mysterious events, and that any action on his part could trigger unpredictable consequences. Meanwhile, Ethan, overly curious, began exploring the upper floor alone, finding signs of recent presence, footprints in accumulated dust, ajar doors, and a faint metallic smell that no one could identify. This created additional tension. John needed not only to unravel the secrets of the mansion, but also to protect those inside, without knowing exactly how the house would react. Margaret's diary entries also contributed to the development of the conflict. The notes indicated that she suspected internal betrayals, with employees and family members wishing to seize control of the mansion. The macabre past began to intersect with the present. John perceived recurring patterns of behavior, as if history were about to repeat itself. Every decision he made seemed guided or tested by unseen forces. The pressure mounted when objects began to mysteriously disappear from the basement. Small items that John examined carefully were no longer where he had left them. Clara, ever observant, discreetly suggested that some things didn't like to be seen. The psychological terror began to intensify, blending fear and curiosity. John found himself in a constant battle between rationality and the feeling that the mansion had a will of its own. To heighten the complexity, personal conflicts began to emerge among the secondary characters. Ethan questioned John's decisions, showing fear but also reckless curiosity. Henry, though experienced, began to confront John about boundaries that should never be crossed. Clara maintained her reserved demeanor, but gestures and glances suggested she knew more than she let on. This web of tension between the characters created multiple layers of conflict, not only the mystery of the house, but also the power dynamics, trust, and fear among those who temporarily inhabited it. The pressure of time began to take its toll. Storms were approaching again, and the mansion reacted as if it were alive, with doors closing on their own and almost imperceptible whispers seeming to float through the corridors. Each obstacle not only increased the suspense, but also tested John's resolve. He realized that unraveling the mansion's secrets would require courage and intelligence, and that any mistake could have irreversible consequences. At the end of the day, John sat alone in the main hall, surrounded by shadows and memories of a dark past that mingled with the present. Each discovery, each reaction from the mansion had intensified the conflict and established a sense of imminent danger. He knew that the mystery of the cellar was not merely a physical or psychological challenge, but an enigma that would test his own perception of reality. The conflict was now fully established. The mansion, with its macabre past, the characters with their own secrets and fears, and the invisible pressure of unknown forces created a continuous tension that threatened to explode at any moment. The next step would be to intertwine subplots and further increase the complexity, preparing the ground for the turning point. The following days brought an unsettling routine. The mansion seemed to react to the rhythm of its occupants, each corridor and each room becoming the stage for small tensions that grew silently. John realized he wasn't alone in his search for the house's secrets. Each secondary character had their own fears and motivations, creating subplots that intertwined with the central conflict. Ethan, the young gardener, began exploring the side gardens alone, ignoring warnings from John and Henry. He found signs that the mansion had been the scene of secret meetings between Margaret and former employees, letters hidden in bushes, boxes buried with personal belongings, and party records concealing shady dealings. His reckless curiosity created tension with John, who feared that any carelessness could unleash dangerous consequences. Ethan's disobedience became a subplot of imminent danger. He was, unknowingly, a catalyst for unexpected events. Clara, the housekeeper, began to reveal subtle clues about the mansion indirectly. Discreet gestures, peculiarly positioned objects, and almost imperceptible observations created a growing tension. She didn't fully trust John, but she also knew that ignoring what he was doing could be fatal. Clara's subplot consisted of balancing protection and surveillance, remaining invisible while guiding events without directly interfering. Henry, on the other hand, carried his own history. He had witnessed disappearances, violent fights, and events that no one else remembered. His demeanor oscillated between calm and nervousness, and small outbursts of anger indicated that he too harbored secrets. The tension between John and Henry transformed into a subplot of conflicting experiences, the rational and pragmatic versus the experienced and traumatized. Each dialogue, however brief, carried layers of distrust and history. Meanwhile, Margaret's diary continued to be an invisible force connecting all the subplots. Seemingly insignificant discoveries by Ethan or John linked to past events, revealing patterns of manipulation, power, and secrets that had shaped the mansion. Past and present converged almost organically. Every action in the present reverberated with echoes of the past, creating narrative complexity without needing lengthy explanations. The pressure of time also intensified. Sudden storms, power outages, and the constant feeling of being watched kept everyone on high alert. The subplots weren't just psychological, they had a physical and emotional impact. Ethan risked his life in the second-floor corridors. Clara felt compelled to intervene discreetly, and John needed to make quick decisions to protect himself and others. Each moment heightened the sense of urgency, and the narrative tension became almost palpable. A new macabre element emerged when John found signs that the mansion continued to record past events. Handprints on seemingly clean walls, scratches on previously intact doors, and objects moved without explanation. These manifestations created a subtle supernatural subplot, connecting the mansion's history to the present without losing the realistic tone that defined the genre. As the subplots unfolded, personal relationships deepened. Ethan began to question John, not only out of fear, but out of a need to understand the limits of what was allowed within the house. Clara demonstrated a veiled care, creating tension between vigilance and friendship. Henry confronted his own past while dealing with the same secrets that John was now discovering. Each relationship added layers of complexity, keeping the focus on the evolution of the main conflict. At the end of the day, John went up to the attic, illuminating the dark corners with a flashlight. There he discovered objects that directly linked Margaret's macabre past to current events. Threatening letters, diaries of missing employees, and old photographs that seemed to move slightly in the flashlight's light. This discovery solidified the intertwining of the subplots, past and present, curiosity and danger, actions and consequences, all connected by an invisible thread of tension that hung over the mansion. The feeling was clear. Every secondary character, every choice made, every interaction was linked to the central conflict, and any action could trigger unpredictable effects. The subplots not only increased the complexity, but also deepened the reader's understanding of the danger the mansion represented. The stage was set for the turning point to emerge, elevating the story to an unexpected level of suspense and macabre revelations. Night fell with unusual intensity. The storm raged outside, while lightning briefly illuminated the mansion's corridors, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. John had spent the day gathering information from Margaret's diary and exploring the basement, but he sensed that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. As I was reviewing the files and photographs, a metallic creak echoed from the attic. At first, John thought it was Ethan, but he soon realized the footsteps didn't match any of the known occupants. Following the sound, he found a door he had never noticed before. It was narrow, with old marks, as if it had been used recently. Hesitantly, he pushed the door open and found himself in a secret room that no one had ever mentioned. Inside, he found objects that transcended logic. Letters dated years before, but with annotations in fresh ink. Margaret's personal belongings, mixed with items that seemed recently placed, and most unsettlingly, an antique mirror that reflected not only her image, but scenes of past events, tragic moments, violent fights, and mysterious disappearances of servants. The mansion not only held memories, it projected them, showing the visitor the reality of everything that had occurred. The real turning point came when John noticed a particular photograph, Margaret Holloway, smiling, but behind her, partially hidden, was a man, Ethan. The date noted on the photo corresponded to a period when Ethan hadn't even been born yet. A chill ran down John's spine. The mansion was revealing a connection between past and present that defied any rational explanation. Ethan, realizing John was taking too long, hurried into the room. When he saw the photograph, his face turned pale. "How is this possible?" he murmured, as if he had seen his own death reflected in the mirror. The tension between the two reached its peak. John wanted answers, but Ethan didn't know if he was frightened by the mansion, the revelation, or himself. Clara and Henry were summoned by John's voice, and together they witnessed a sequence of events that seemed impossible. The mirror began to tremble slightly, reflecting not only the past, but anticipations of events that had not yet occurred. Objects began to move on their own. Papers flew, doors slammed, and shadows danced in impossible patterns. Every gesture, every reaction showed that the mansion was alive, and that its intention was not only to test the living, but also to reveal secrets that should never be known. At that moment, the final revelation emerged. The secret compartment in the basement held not only Margaret's memories, but a surveillance mechanism she had built to control everything and everyone. Detailed notes indicated that she anticipated reactions, mapped human behavior, and recorded every deviation from the expected. The mansion, therefore, was a living testament to manipulation, pain, and absolute control. John realized that his foray was not just a real estate exploration. He had entered a carefully planned trap where every step was foreseen and recorded. Tension reached its peak when Ethan momentarily disappeared. A scream echoed down the hallway, but when John and Clara rushed to him, they found the young man kneeling before an old panel, murmuring names he didn't recognize. The walls seemed to pulse, and the mirror reflected images of Ethan from different eras, showing that he was somehow inexplicably connected to Margaret. The line between past, present, and future blurred, and the mansion proved far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The turning point solidified with the realization that the house was not merely a physical space, but an organism that reacted to the actions, fears, and curiosities of its inhabitants. Each character was now deeply involved, and the tension between them grew. Trust, fear, and suspicion intertwined, while each choice could drastically alter the course of the story. John finally realized that the climax was approaching. What he had interpreted as exploration and curiosity was now a test of emotional and psychological survival. Every detail of the mansion, objects, shadows, historical records, contributed to transforming the conflict into something that transcended physical space, making the narrative unpredictable and macabre. The turning point ended with one last surprise. Margaret's diary opened on its own to a blank page, and written in freshly applied ink appeared words that no one had written before. "The truth lies before you, but no one will emerge unscathed." The warning was not merely a threat, it was a prophecy that foretold that the mansion would display its full power before revealing the ultimate fate of all who dared to remain there. The silence that followed the turning point was almost deafening. The mansion seemed to breathe irregularly, as if processing what had just happened. John, Clara, and Henry were motionless, still absorbing the revelations from the mirror and the words that had recently appeared in the diary. Ethan, for his part, remained in shock, murmuring fragments of names and dates that seemed to connect him directly to the former owner. The consequences of the turning point were immediate. The atmosphere inside the mansion became more oppressive, and the perception that they were being watched intensified. Every corridor, every room seemed to pulse with hidden memories and intentions. The psychological tension affected not only John, but everyone who inhabited the space. Small disputes began to emerge based on fear, distrust, and suspicion. Henry, normally firm and composed, revealed a fragility. Revisiting the basement, he trembled before the boxes and documents that now seemed to contain secrets even more disturbing than he remembered. The memory of past disappearances haunted him, and he began to question whether surviving it all was truly possible. His reaction showed the depth of the scars the mansion had left on all who served it, not just physical, but psychological. Clara, on the other hand, adopted a protective stance toward John and Ethan. Her experience made her cautious, but growing fear compelled her to move quickly, preventing any misstep that could unleash the house's implicit fury. Clara's discreet surveillance subplot became even more relevant as she began to silently intervene whenever the mansion seemed to be testing its limits. Ethan, emotionally shaken, began to become unstable. The revelation of his inexplicable connection to Margaret Holloway confused him, and his erratic behavior created additional tension within the group. John had to deal not only with the mansion and its mystery, but also with the young man's emotional instability, realizing that every decision could trigger unpredictable consequences. The mansion also reacted physically. Doors that had previously remained closed began to open on their own. Windows cracked in the wind, and shadows moved almost consciously. Small objects changed places, as if the house itself were organizing the environment to reflect its control over its occupants. These manifestations reinforced the feeling that the mansion was not merely a physical place, but an organism with its own intelligence. Each character reacted differently. John, maintaining his pragmatism, began to analyze the house's behavioral patterns, seeking to understand its implicit rules. He realized he needed to map every action, every interaction, and every reaction to survive and protect the others. Henry, overcome by fear, retreated into silence, avoiding confrontations and trying only to observe the house's movements. Clara balanced protection and vigilance, using her knowledge of the mansion to anticipate dangers, while Ethan oscillated between curiosity and dread, threatening to accidentally trigger unexpected events. The emotional consequences began to manifest in short, tense conversations. Every word carried weight. Every decision could be a fatal mistake. The psychological tension mixed with the physical pressure of the mansion, creating an atmosphere of constant instability. The story not only presented risks, but demanded adaptation and quick responses from the characters, leaving no room for hesitation. The scope of the turning point became clear. The mansion had tested everyone's limits, exposing secrets, connecting past and present, and showing that the real danger was not only physical, but psychological. Each character began to realize that their own actions, fears, and decisions would directly affect how the story unfolded. At the end of the day, John watched Ethan sitting alone in the living room, still processing the revelation of his connection to Margaret. Clara examined documents scattered on the floor, while Henry remained silent, collecting old objects and avoiding looking in the mirror. Everyone knew the mansion had changed, and that the next step would be to confront what was still hidden. The growing tension indicated that the final challenges were approaching, paving the way for the evolution and overcoming that would follow. The silence that followed the previous night seemed heavier, almost suffocating. John realized that if he wanted to survive the mansion and understand its secrets, he would need to act differently, no longer just as a curious observer, but as someone capable of interpreting signs, anticipating movements, and protecting those around him. The first challenge came from the basement itself. Objects began to move with greater intensity, letters flew through the air, and shadows projected images of past events and possible futures. The mansion seemed to test not only courage, but discernment. John then decided to map the environment, recording patterns, sounds, and the positions of objects. He began to react with strategic attention instead of impulsiveness, showing growth in how he dealt with danger. Ethan, who had previously been lost in panic and confusion, began to observe and learn from John. Gradually, his fear gave way to concentration. He followed instructions carefully, avoiding behaviors that could previously have triggered unpredictable consequences. This evolution was subtle but noticeable. Ethan began to become useful in the exploration, while the mansion reacted less violently when he acted cautiously. Clara also evolved. Until then, her posture was one of discreet but passive protection. Upon realizing that John and Ethan were ready to act in a coordinated manner, she assumed a more proactive role, anticipating dangers, signaling risks, and guiding the team. Her growing confidence helped reduce tension between the characters, creating a sense of cooperation and strategy that did not exist before. Henry, though carrying traumas from the past, began to share crucial details about the mansion and the past events that unfolded there. His experience, combined with the new behavior of the others, transformed the group's dynamic. John realized that confronting the mansion was not just a matter of courage, but of intelligence, collaboration, and resilience. John's growth also manifested itself in bolder decisions. He explored the hidden attic, where he found letters, photos, and objects that revealed the true extent of Margaret Holloway's control over the servants and family members. Instead of being intimidated by the macabre revelations, John began to use this information to understand the mansion's behavioral patterns. He realized that the key was not to flee, but to confront the house head-on, with strategy and discernment, applying knowledge acquired over days of tension and fear. One of the most critical moments occurred when Ethan found a passage leading to an old storage room hidden beneath the garden. Initially fearful, he managed to guide John and Clara to the location, showing courage and initiative. There they discovered detailed records of events that had taken place in the mansion for decades, including rituals and surveillance measures that kept Margaret's secret history intact. Instead of feeling defeated by terror, the characters began to understand how the house worked and how they could use it to their advantage. The physical and psychological pressure demanded continuous adaptations. Doors that locked, shadows that moved, and inexplicable noises were dealt with using practical methods, paying attention to patterns, cooperation between the characters, and quick reactions. Each victory, however small, reinforced the feeling of personal growth. John became more observant and strategic, Ethan more focused and courageous, Clara more proactive, Henry more willing to share his experience without fear of failure. The growth wasn't just individual, but collective. The group began to operate in unison, anticipating movements within the mansion and preventing incidents that would have previously caught them off guard. Tension persisted, but now there was control over fear, a strategy in the face of chaos, and a renewed determination to uncover the secrets of the house. The pinnacle of overcoming came when John decided to directly confront the central compartment of the basement, where Margaret's most macabre records were kept. He entered with Ethan and Clara, coordinating movements and decisions, and was finally able to interact with the environment in a controlled manner, minimizing risks and anticipating manifestations from the mansion. Each step and each action demonstrated a visible transformation. Courage was no longer impulsive but conscious, fear no longer paralyzed but guided strategy. At the end of the day, with important records uncovered and subplots partially resolved, John looked at the mansion with a new perspective. He understood that overcoming the horrors wasn't just about surviving them, but about understanding patterns, respecting boundaries, and working together. The group, though scarred by terror, was stronger, more united, and more aware of what they would face in the approaching climax. Dawn brought a pale light, filtering through dusty windows and highlighting the decaying grandeur of the mansion. The previous night's storm had passed, but the tension had not lessened. John, Clara, Henry, and Ethan were aware that what they had faced so far was merely the prelude to the final challenge. Every decision made in the preceding days now served as preparation for the confrontation that was approaching. The characters began to organize the discovered records. The letters, diaries, and photographs that had previously seemed like disconnected fragments began to form clear patterns. John realized that Margaret Holloway not only controlled the mansion, but had left meticulously prepared clues to test any intruder. Understanding these patterns became essential to avoid traps, both physical and psychological, and ensured that each character had a defined role in the strategy. Ethan, now more focused, became responsible for identifying signs of sudden changes in the mansion, doors that locked themselves for no reason, objects that moved, and inexplicable noises. His evolution allowed them to anticipate actions in the house that would have previously caught them off guard. Clara continued protecting and guiding the group's movements, ensuring that no one put themselves in unnecessary danger. Henry, even marked by his traumatic past, decided to face his fear with experience, serving as a guide and advisor to John. As they explored the basement and upper corridors, they realized that the mansion seemed to intensify its manifestations. Denser shadows, almost audible whispers, and sudden temperature changes indicated that the environment was reacting to the group's presence and intentions. Each step required coordination and extreme attention. The tension increased with each corridor, but at the same time, the group's strategy allowed them to deal with the danger more efficiently, transforming fear into vigilance. The preparation also included resolving the secondary subplots. Ethan, confronting his inexplicable connection to Margaret, began to accept that part of his fear stemmed from untold stories, and he used this knowledge to understand how the mansion worked. Clara, who had kept secrets about past observations, shared vital information that helped avoid subtle traps. Henry finally decided to reveal hidden details about previous disappearances, clarifying mysteries that had previously threatened to confuse and paralyze the group. Each subplot was integrated into the main narrative, strengthening the group and preparing them for the climax. The group also faced physical challenges. Doors would lock unexpectedly, hallways would change direction as if the house were alive, and objects would fall from shelves without explanation. Each event forced the characters to react together, developing coordination and increasing their sense of urgency. They began to trust each other and their own abilities to interpret the mansion's signals. John realized that the escalating tension was not merely a physical or psychological test, but also a moral one. Every decision would influence who survived, what secrets would be revealed, and how they would face the final confrontation. The mansion, with its history of manipulation and pain, seemed to demand that the group demonstrate not only courage, but intelligence, empathy, and unity. At the end of the preparations, the group gathered in the main hall. Maps, documents, and photographs were spread out, clearly showing patterns and critical areas of the mansion. John looked at Ethan, Clara, and Henry, realizing that each had evolved significantly. Fear still existed, but now it coexisted with confidence and determination. The shadows of the mansion continued to move unpredictably, reminding them that the climax would be intense, unpredictable, and dangerous. The preparation wasn't just logistical, it was psychological and strategic. Each character was ready to face the final horrors of the mansion, with coordinated actions and an understanding of the patterns that had dominated the story. In the final moments before the climax, John took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the history they now carried. Decades-old secrets, memories of pain and violence, and the living force of the mansion that defied reason. Everything was ready. The final confrontation would not only be about surviving, but about uncovering the truth and dealing with the consequences of every choice made. Night descended upon the mansion with supernatural intensity. The wind howled through the broken windows, doors slammed shut on their own, and shadows danced in impossible patterns through the hallways. Every step the group took seemed to be followed. Every breath echoed through the rooms. John sensed clearly that the mansion was about to unleash its full power. The group entered the central basement, where Margaret Holloway's oldest and most macabre records were kept. The tension was almost palpable. The air seemed thicker, and the cold seeped into their bones. Ethan, still shaken, stayed close to John, trying to control the panic that threatened to overwhelm him. Clara watched every corner, ready to intervene, while Henry, with trembling hands, guided them through the scattered objects. The first challenge was physical. The mansion seemed to transform before their eyes. Walls moved, doors slammed shut, and objects fell without explanation. The group realized that to move forward, they would need to work in perfect coordination. John led, giving quick and precise instructions. Every action had to be calculated, as the house responded immediately to any impulsive gesture. Then came the most disturbing revelation. The antique mirror in the corner of the room began to reflect not only the past, but also possible futures. Images of Ethan at different times, of Margaret manipulating employees and family members, and of John making critical decisions appeared and disappeared in fractions of a second. The line between reality and projection blurred, and the group had to discern what was true in order not to be lost in fear. Clara pointed out a crucial detail. Certain objects moved predictably when the group acted in sync. Using this, they began to manipulate the environment to their advantage, avoiding traps and advancing through the basement. Each movement required mutual trust, quick thinking, and courage. The mansion tested not only strength or endurance, but emotional intelligence, strategy, and unity. The climax came when John found the final compartment, locked by complex mechanisms. Upon opening it, they discovered records that revealed the true extent of Margaret's control. It wasn't just about monitoring employees, but about creating a system that recorded, manipulated, and perpetuated secrets, tragedies, and disappearances over decades. The mansion, with all its corridors, doors, and shadows, was an instrument of her power, and now the group understood that they were facing not just a house, but the living manifestation of the former owner's will. Ethan, confronting his inexplicable connection to Margaret, finally accepted that part of his fear stemmed from connections he couldn't understand, but which could be used to his advantage. His courage emerged at the right moment, allowing him to help disarm dangerous mechanisms and guide the group through passages that previously seemed impossible to traverse. The final confrontation with the mansion brought maximum tension. Doors slamming shut, windows exploding with gusts of wind, objects flying through the air, and shadows that seemed to come alive. Every character needed to act quickly, trust each other, and remain calm. John led firmly, showing that the resilience gained in the previous days was the key to controlling, or at least surviving, the chaos. At the decisive moment, the group managed to open the final compartment and access the records containing Margaret's last secret. It was proof that all the manipulation and terror had been planned, but it also indicated a way out. The mansion reacted not only to fear, but to courage and collective intelligence. By facing the danger with confidence and strategy, the characters finally broke part of the power that kept the house in absolute control. The effect was immediate. The shadows receded, the objects stopped moving violently, and the mansion fell silent for the first time in decades. The group breathed a sigh of relief, feeling that the battle had been won, but also aware that each of them had changed forever. The climax not only resolved the central conflict, but transformed the characters. John became more insightful and courageous, Ethan more resilient and confident, Clara more proactive and strategic, Henry more willing to confront his past. At the end of the climax, the mansion remained imposing, yet silent. Every corridor, every room, and every shadow carried the weight of the memories that John and his group had faced. The final confrontation had revealed the truth and tested the courage, intelligence, and unity of the characters. They emerged from the basement not only as survivors, but as victors who understood the secrets of the mansion and the importance of each choice made. Silence now reigned supreme within the mansion. The shadows that had once danced through the corridors had vanished, and the objects that had moved on their own stood motionless, as if the house had finally recognized the courage and intelligence of those who had remained within. John, Ethan, Clara, and Henry gathered in the main hall, each absorbing the weight of what they had experienced and discovered. The mansion hadn't changed in its external appearance, but something inside had been altered. The oppressive presence that once seemed alive now appeared more restrained, as if recognizing that those who had faced its horrors had earned a certain respect. Each character understood that the actions taken, the risks faced, and the strategic decisions made not only ensured survival, but transformed their own perception of what was possible within that macabre space. Ethan, once dominated by fear, now moved cautiously, but confidently. He faced the corridors with attentive eyes, no longer paralyzed by the terror of the unknown, but prepared to react intelligently. Clara, who had assumed the role of protector and strategist, felt the satisfaction of having balanced care and action, keeping the group safe and organized. Henry, finally freed from the weight of the past he carried, recognized that facing the mansion was also facing his own traumas. John, as leader, felt strengthened, aware that each choice had been decisive but also responsible for guiding the others with courage and discernment. Margaret Holloway's records remained in the mansion, but now under the understanding that truth, when confronted with courage and intelligence, could be understood and neutralized. The letters, photos, and old objects no longer seemed like threats, but reminders that knowledge and strategy were powerful weapons in the face of mystery and terror. The story's conclusion showed that, although the mansion remained a place of mystery and a macabre past, the characters emerged transformed. Each carried scars, physical, emotional, and psychological, but also lessons learned, strength and resilience. The experience left deep marks, but also a unique understanding of danger, courage, and the human capacity to overcome extreme situations. As they prepared to leave the mansion, the group realized that their experiences would not be forgotten. The story of Margaret Holloway and the house she shaped would continue to exist, but now the survivors possessed the knowledge and strength necessary to face any future challenge. The mansion, silent and imposing, remained a monument to the past, but the active and strategic presence of the characters had changed its dynamics forever. The wind blew through the broken windows, bringing a chill that recalled the terror they had endured, but also a sense of relief and accomplishment. The journey was over, but the impact of what they had lived through would echo in each of their lives. The mansion, with all its macabre history, no longer controlled the survivors. On the contrary, they now carried within them the ability to understand and master the mysteries they had faced. Months had passed since the last night at the mansion. John continued to mentally revisit each discovery, knowing that the house's past still echoed in his memories. Ethan, now more mature and aware, avoided dark corridors, but carried with him the courage he had gained. Clara maintained contact with former residents of the area, monitoring signs of hidden stories, while Henry wrote accounts that documented the truth about Margaret Holloway. The mansion remained isolated, silent, but John knew its walls held secrets that could awaken once more. The feeling of being watched had never completely disappeared, reminding them that the story was far from over. If you were fascinated by the mystery of Holloway Manor and the secrets it has kept for decades, share this story with friends who love suspense and macabre tales. Comment below. Which part of the manor would you dare to explore? Could you unravel Margaret Holloway's secrets without being overcome by fear? Every choice, every decision, and every shadow in this narrative can teach us about courage, intelligence, and the strength of unity in the face of the unknown. Don't let this story remain silent. Participate, reflect, and tell your own version of the terror that lurks in the forgotten corridors.